So, growing up, my parents and I didn't really have the best relationship. Nothing too bad. They weren't abusive or anything, just extremely emotionally distant. I couldn't talk to them about anything. Crushes, heartbreaks, bullying. I had to deal with that all on my own. Luckily, I had a great group of friends to lean back on. Now, after graduating, I went off to college. Student loans, mind you. My parents believe in letting me pay my own way, even though they are more than affluent enough to have helped me out, which is fine. Dad sucks, but at least I'm in control of my own finances. It was great. I was doing well academically and had a part-time job as well. Now here's the part where I might be an a-hole. When I went back home during semester breaks, my parents had asked me to pay rent. Lower than market rate, but still substantial for a student like me. I didn't argue, bit my tongue and went with it. All the free time I had went into jobs and chores. I then tried talking to them about it. They said if I wanted to live in their house, I will have to contribute. And of course, that contribution took literally all my time. I didn't really complain after that, but I vowed to myself to completely go my own way once I graduate and get into a position to support myself. And I did. After I graduated and landed a job, I went no contact with them and haven't spoken to them in over a decade. They have reached out multiple times over the years, but I've always refused. I have my friends. I have a girl I'm going to marry, my own family, like an actual family. Why exactly should I get in touch with them? They weren't interested in being parents. Now I no longer want to be their kid. Simple, right? My fiancée disagrees. She says I should make an effort to communicate. So am I the a-hole for not doing so? They said that if I want to live in their house, I will have to contribute. I asked them if they could reduce the chores instead, so I could have more time to relax. They said yes, but only if I agreed to pay higher rent. But that would mean I would have to work more. So I just chose to do the chores instead. It was also hard to find for just a couple of months at a time. Keep in mind, I was spending most of the year on campus. You're not the a-hole OP. Your parents shouldn't have charged you for shelter for the period that you would be home during a break for college. They are already not helping with your college, but they added that into the mix too. It's not about the money, but when parents do this, they kind of make their children feel like they just cannot be bothered to care or fend for them. And this is exactly what your parents succeeded in doing. They were not there for you in any way. It's understandable that you wouldn't want anything to do with them now that you're older. I think you should try explaining your position again. Now for some comments. If you had cut your parents off solely for charging you rent, then yeah, you would come off as an a-hole. However, your first paragraph details growing up with emotional neglect, and that is considered a form of abuse. It might be worth looking deeper into your feelings about your childhood, the lack of support you received from your parents in general, and explaining this point of view to your fiancé, without summarizing it as, well, they charged me rent, so. Rent sounds like a final straw, not the actual cause. Not the a-hole. You are allowed to choose the people you allow into your life. Charging rent for semester break is pretty awful, especially when they were paying nothing for your college. You have allowed her into your life, so she should think that your taste in people is pretty good. So why is she doubting your judgment when she's never even met your parents? Make sure she understands you before you marry her. Get this subject settled for good. Otherwise, you will deal with constant nagging and might even get ambushed with a surprise visit she orchestrates with your parents. When my kid goes off to college, in many years but still, I would never dream of charging her money to live at home on her break, or even if she stayed at home and commuted to classes. When she's over 18, I will teach her budgeting in the form of asking her to buy her own portion of groceries. Obviously, if it's a family meal, that's a different story, but things just for her. And make sure she contributes to the household by doing a bit of housework every now and then. There are ways of teaching your kid these things without totally taking advantage of them and forcing them to work their asses off unnecessarily. Hell, even just showing them the monthly household budget and how it works would give them a good base knowledge for how that will work when they do pay rent. Story 2. I'm a 19-year-old girl and my parents divorced 4 years ago when my dad came home in the middle of the night, woke my mother up and told her that he never loved her. He had been having an affair with some girl, we'll call her Tiffany, who he met at work. Tiffany was 28 at the time and he was 41. He didn't want us to know right away, but the fighting woke me and my brother up. And my dad pretty much told us that he had been wasting his life with our mom. He almost cried, but I just really hated him at the moment. He married Tiffany about 2 years later and she had twin girls. I didn't want to go for every other weekend visit and he thought I was too old to force me. He would take me out to dinner and invite me to the house and stuff, but I never spent the night. This put a real strain on our relationship, and recently he's been open about missing me and wanting me to know my 2 little sisters. My brother and Tiffany get along great. He does 50-50, but when the pandemic got bad and he had to pick, he chose to stay with my dad and Tiffany. I resent everyone, even my brother, for how much they've hurt my mom. My dad convinced me to spend the weekend with him, though I was apprehensive. Tiffany was nice for the first day, like really over-eager nice. But when I didn't respond, she got sort of cold and passive-aggressive. Growing up, my dad was this really old-fashioned man who never showed any emotion, but now he's always all over Tiffany. I think it's really weird to grab your wife's butt in front of your kids, but it's not an easy thing to bring up. The other night, my dad grilled and we all ate outside. The babies were in their little pool, my dad and brother had been swimming, and my brother had even sucked water up in front of those noodle things and squirted Tiffany at one point. My point is no one was dressed up and she didn't mind getting wet. Well, they were kissing, like they always do, like making out. I know Tiffany knows how much it bothers me, and at one point, she even looked right at me. So I filled up one of the baby's plastic buckets with water and tossed it at them to cool them off. I get this wasn't the most mature thing, but she's always bragging about how she's the fun parent and she has so much fun with my brother. And I know if he did, it would have been just considered a prank. But I guess Tiffany cried afterwards and now my dad is pissed. Am I the a-hole? OP, I'm not gonna say Tiffany is completely innocent. Passive-aggressive behavior is an immature way to handle things. But it seems like your anger towards her is misdirected and really stems from your dad, as it takes 2 people to have an affair. Not saying you have to like her or have the relationship she has with your brother, but there are ways to be civil. You guys definitely need to set boundaries with each other if you're going to continue a relationship with them moving forward. You don't want to create an environment of constant conflict and resentment. Now for some comments. Everyone sucks here. Your dad for having the affair and being a butt. Your stepmom for being passive-aggressive and not taking your feelings into account. You mildly for intolerance of their relationship. I don't think you should go over there anymore. You're justified in your anger. But it's not solving anything and you are just not ready to let it go, and that's okay. But you shouldn't be somewhere you are miserable. You are the a-hole. You didn't do it as a joke. You did it because you didn't like something they were doing. That means your intent doesn't match the way you want them to take it, and intent matters. There is nothing wrong with loving your partner and having a kiss or touching a butt when at home in your own space. If you're not comfortable with it, say so or choose to leave. At 19, you have the ability to make decisions like an adult. I would like to point out a little water isn't the end of the world, but in this context, it makes you an a-hole. Everyone sucks here. You cannot control what your dad, your brother or Tiffany do. You can only control what you do. If you don't like Tiffany, don't spend time with her. Don't pretend you're doing your dad some sort of favor. You cannot force your dad to choose between you and his new wife. You can simply make your own choices. If that means you don't spend time with him, then that's your choice. As for spraying her, of course, she would have been fine with your brother doing it. When your friends or someone you like is a kid with you, it's fine. She's not obligated to accept this kind of behavior from someone who can't even be civil to her. Story 3. I've been married for 5 years and there is definitely a little tension between my mom and wife, but I can't put my finger on it exactly. My wife and I recently had a fight because she wants me to stand up to my mom, but she could not give any specifics of what my mom is doing wrong. Some of her complaints are that my mom will not eat at our house. That is true, but I'm not going to dictate what she does with her body. If she doesn't want to eat, she doesn't have to eat. Another is that when my parents were having work done and we asked if they wanted to stay with us, my mom said, "I really can't," and they got a hotel. Again, she's a grown woman. If she is uncomfortable, she is uncomfortable. She said that my mom never invites her to family gatherings when it is just women. But she is not close to any of the women in the family. So I'm not sure if that is just my mom's decision. She said my mom makes passive-aggressive comments about us not being happy. I've heard her mention a couple of times that we never touch each other, and I told her to let it go, and she did. I think that came from a place of genuine concern. The only valid complaint my wife has is that my mom doesn't respect boundaries with the kids, which is kind of true, but hasn't been an issue in a couple of years. I did stand up for my wife and my mom's response was to take a step back and say she couldn't help us out with childcare anymore. So maybe petty, but like all of these instances, she has the right to say no. My wife and I had an argument last night because she wanted me to call my mom up and yell at her for these little things that either haven't happened in years or are really her right. Yes, I get the impression that my mom finds our food and house gross, but I'm not going to tell her what to do with her own body. I was honest and said I don't see the issue. And now my wife is mad because she said I'm gaslighting her and devaluing her concerns. Now for some comments. You're the a-hole. You seem to have a reason for shutting down each and every one of her concerns. Maybe, just for the sake of the exercise, try to think about how you would react if you thought each of her concerns were valid. The problem is not who is right or wrong. It's that you're showing very little empathy, and it will eventually shatter the trust between the two of you. You're the a-hole for pretending you can't see the issue after listing the many ways your mother disrespects your marriage and your wife. No, I don't think you can or should call her and get it all out at once. But your mother behaves poorly. She's petty and makes mean comments, and your answer is you can't make her do things she doesn't want to do. She doesn't have to come stay at your place. She also didn't have to wring her little hands and say she can't. You are pretending not to hear her comments. Those are what hurt your wife. You're the a-hole for invalidating all of your wife's concerns, including the only valid one, which turns into kinda true then, not an issue in the last years. You're not even entertaining the possibility that she has a point, nor are you trying to see it from her perspective at all. Yes, your mother has the right to decide all those things, but it doesn't mean that it's not shitty and hurtful of her to do so. Refusing to see how your mother's behavior is affecting your wife's feelings could very well be the end of your marriage one day, as these things often pile up until they explode, which might very well have been mom's desired outcome all along.